And welcome to the webinar. I'm Candace Chapman, VP of Marketing for Genomenon, and I'll be your host today. Today we welcome our co-founder, Mark Kiel, who will be taking us through the new features of Mastermind version 2.0. This is the largest update to Mastermind yet, and it has some really awesome new functionality. Mark has some great stuff to share, so I'll get right to housekeeping and introductions. If you are watching, please feel free to submit questions through the chat window on the right, and Mark will answer questions after the presentation. You can also email your questions to mark.kiel@genomenon.com. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker. Mark completed his PhD, MD, and Molecular Genetic Pathology Fellowship at the University of Michigan, where his research focused on stem cell biology, genomic profiling of hematopoietic malignancies, and clinical bioinformatics. He's the founder and CSO of Genomenon, where he supervises the scientific direction of the Mastermind suite of software tools. So without further ado, Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Candace, and welcome everybody. I will go through this tutorial in 3 stages. I'll begin by going through an overview of what Mastermind is and its intended use. I'll go through some housekeeping issues, setting up Mastermind and recovering passwords and the like. And then the heart of the tutorial will be going through specific use cases that highlight the feature set and illuminate the value that Mastermind provides for those particular use cases. So I'll begin by describing what Mastermind is. It is a search engine that is organizing the world's genomic evidence from the medical literature. And to date, we've indexed the titles and abstracts of PubMed, all 30 million of those, and do so nightly, looking for genetic and genomic content, and then seek out and fully index the full text of those articles that have anything of relevance to the work that our users do for variant interpretation. And to date, that amounts to 7 million full text articles and growing by 10 or 20,000 articles per week, and includes a vast amount of data from more than 700,000 supplemental data sets. Both of those bodies of evidence are updated on a weekly basis. So together that represents the most comprehensive data set of this type of information that's available anywhere. And what we do when we identify those references that are meaningful is look for the mention of any one of thousands of different diseases that comprise the totality of human disease, predicated on medical subject heading terms or MESH terms. We're happy to announce that with Mastermind 2.0, we've included now the entire battery of phenotypes from the Human Phenotype Ontology, or HPO, dataset. And importantly, we index all of this evidence for the mention of any one of the tens of thousands of genes in the entire human genome using HGNC accepted symbols, as well as an entire battery of synonyms for those genes to maximize the sensitivity of our result set. And once we've identified a gene in any one of these data sets, articles or supplemental data, we index the rest of that article or data set for the mention of literally billions of possible genetic variants in any one of those genes or any one of their transcripts, whether they be mentioned at the cDNA level, the protein level, or described as RSIDs. And finally, we annotate all of this evidence with any one of hundreds of different key terms that are categorized according to specific uses that I'll illuminate here in one of the specific use cases, as well as in version 2.0 of Mastermind, allow for free text search capability to enhance the specificity of your search and provide you with a more detailed annotation of the data that your gene or variant queries return. So Mastermind, the software, was originally intended for clinical use, but we have 2 versions of Mastermind, the basic edition and the professional edition. The professional edition is intended for clinical use, but we have a great number of researchers who take advantage of the basic edition of Mastermind to perform some of their genomic studies and data aggregation exercises. So with Mastermind being intended for clinical use, it's important to recognize that it's operating in and returning results in sensitivity mode to enhance the sensitivity of your search results and giving you feature capabilities to allow you to home in on specific content. So that's the overview of Mastermind. Let me talk a little bit more explicitly about setting up Mastermind once you've signed on to receive your login credentials. So the first place that I'm showing here is the Genomenon homepage that contains a lot of useful information, including aspects of this tutorial that you can refer to, such as webinars, webinar clips, and PDF information that document some of these use cases. Again, I mentioned that there is a basic edition and a professional edition, and I can highlight what those differences are here after I've described, as I said, what the use is of the professional edition intended for clinical purposes. Professional edition affords you unlimited search capability. It allows you to perform multi-parameter searches, including the addition of diseases and phenotypes to hone in on specific results, as well as any one of those keywords. In addition, it provides you with results that come from those many hundreds of thousands of supplemental data sets. So once you've signed on to receive access to Mastermind, you'll receive a welcome email that contains information about logging in and configuring the Mastermind search engine, which you can access from your web browser. That welcome email will also be followed by a number of points of information as you walk through your initial use of Mastermind, some helpful tips and pointers as you're learning how to use the software. The first item of housekeeping is you have the ability to opt into the Mastermind Search Companion for Google Chrome. Google Chrome is the preferred browser because of this Search Companion. It enhances the capability of your use of Mastermind. Most principally in the Mastermind interface, it allows you to see those full text PDFs for which you have access, either through an institution or whether they're open access and available to the public. It also provides additional use capabilities on other websites that you can opt into, including Google Scholar, but the user, when they sign on to this Chrome extension, has total control over what features of Mastermind get inserted into those websites. The next place that I'll go to round out the conversation about Mastermind setup is the homepage, which you can see here at the mastermind.genomenon.com website. Up in the upper right are a number of different access points. There's a bell here that provides you with notifications of updates from us, including most recently the version 2.0 launch. There's a help dropdown that also points you to those features on the website that I talked about, the user guides, the video tutorials, the frequently asked questions. There's a My Account dropdown. I'm currently logged in, so there's no need for me to log in now, but you'll see a prompt to log in. This is also the place where you'd go to change your password if you had lost it. And then there's other capabilities that we point you to, such as the Mastermind API. If you have higher throughput needs as a lab and you'd like to receive more of this data in bulk through programmed queries of Mastermind, clicking on the API will take you to a page that describes some of that capability and allows you to play around with some of that data. There's also the alerts capability, which I'll highlight in one of the use cases. You can either sign up for individual alerts into Mastermind through that website if you click on the About Mastermind Alerts, or otherwise you can talk to us about setting up more batch configuration for many hundreds or thousands of variants that you'd like to be alerted to new publications emerging in the Mastermind database. And lastly, before I begin with some of these use cases, I'll emphasize that you can reach out to us with any questions that you have, be they technical or scientific, or otherwise, if you think you have a useful suggestion. We love getting feedback from our users. That's how we've been able to make so much progress in such a short amount of time. So with all that said, let's get started with some specific use cases that will allow me to highlight the features in Mastermind, particularly pointing to some of the new use features in version 2.0 in the event that there are some users of the previous version of Mastermind who'd like a little refresher. So the first use case is if I'm a researcher or clinician and I'm interested in whether a variant has been published before so that I can make my clinical diagnosis. This is the most common use case that our users of the user interface of Mastermind find. It's the one that I want to spend the most time on, and it's the one where I'll be able to highlight the most value that is provided by Mastermind Search. So in this interface, we now have a single search bar that allows you to type in any one of those different search inputs, genes and variants, diseases, phenotypes, or as well as custom text. For this particular use case, I begin simply by typing in the gene. So very quickly, I see that Mastermind has recognized what gene I'm referring to. Mastermind recognizes all of the symbols and synonyms of all of the tens of thousands of genes in the human genome. If I click on that gene, I can continue on now to type in the variant. So when I type in the variant, you'll notice that I typed in just the single letter amino acid code without HGVS nomenclature. I could also type in with the P dot. I don't happen to know the C dot for this variant, but if I had C dot nomenclature, I could type that in as well, in addition to using RSIDs if this happens to be a dbSNP entity. So once I've typed in the variant, I'll click on the variant, and now my search is ready to be executed. And you'll see how it takes me directly to this detail page in Mastermind. So I want to highlight for you where to focus your attention to address this specific use case of what papers have been published citing this particular variant. Over here on the right, in graphical form, is the publication history for that variant, with each of those circles representing an individual article. On the x-axis is the publication date, so you can see recent and seminal articles from as recently as last week to as remotely as the 1960s. On the y-axis is the impact factor or citation score for each of the journals where those individual articles are published. And then the size of each of those article icons is a reflection of the relevance of that content to your search terms. And there's a couple of parameters that we use. Principally, it is the amount of references or citations of each of those terms in that particular article, but it also takes into account how close together they're mentioned and where in the hierarchy of the paper they're mentioned, in addition to a couple of other parameters. That relevance calculation is the default setting for how we organize all of those articles that have cited that particular variant in the article pane below that lists every one of those references. You can toggle that by moving the sort by feature to show match count, which is to say how many times the individual term has been presented in that paper. That will reprioritize the article list so that you're seeing now the papers that cite that variant most numerously in their content. You can also sort by publication date as well as that impact factor. This list is fully exportable in the professional edition if you have downstream needs where you'd like to do further investigation of all of that bibliographic information. In addition, we link out to Google Scholar if you'd like to perform a different type of search in Google Scholar. And we have a partnership with Varsum that links out to their website and provides some information about population frequency and in silico predictions of pathogenicity. But for Mastermind, what I want to draw your attention to is all of the articles that cite that variant. The number of articles is listed here because they befit your search input. So there's 91 total articles. They're all presented visually in the publication landscape. They're all listed here in list form with the bibliographic information here, the title, the date, and the journal. These little icons represent the fact that their content has been full text indexed. The little paperclip icon indicates that that variant is mentioned somewhere in the supplemental material for that article. And then over here on the right is a reflection of the number of times either the gene or the variant has been mentioned in Mastermind. Clicking on any one of those articles will pull up the two bottom panes, which illuminate the PubMed data on the left, the title, the bibliographic information, and the fully highlighted abstract for that article. And then over here on the right, the full text matches for different terms, including your search terms that are contained in those articles. And you can toggle from the default view of genes and variants that are described to say just showing the variant only mentions, and you can see the full text sentence context where those variants that you had searched on are mentioned, in this case, the C73R variant. You'll also be able to rapidly toggle from paper to paper as you're reading through or skimming through the titles and abstracts and the full text content to determine which article is most relevant, most likely to address your specific clinical concern. As I toggle through, you'll note that we're still displaying the variant mentions from the full text there. And if you land on a paper that you are particularly interested in, sometimes it's sufficient to capture this information here directly in Mastermind. Other times it's useful to pull up the full PDF. If you have access to that content, as I said, whether you're behind an institution that has access to that journal or otherwise it's open access content, you can click on that show PDF either in Mastermind itself, or there's another button that allows you to show it in a new tab, and you'll be able to review that PDF in-app. Clicking on the show matches will take you back to the full text sentence matches. You'll notice how this pane is now maximized. Many of our users find the most value in this lower right-hand window, and so they prefer to have that maximized as they're searching. If you'd like to restore the view so that you're now seeing the full article list and the visual display of those articles, you can expand or collapse the panes as you need to. Another question, as I mentioned earlier, is that you'd like to see the most recent articles because you're, familiar with this variant and you're looking for any new content that may have been published since you last reviewed it. You can do that by searching the variant and sorting on publication date. So sorting on publication date, as you can see here, I'll expand this article list, highlights that as recently as October 7th from 2019, there's a variant there's a paper that mentions this particular variant. So if you've reviewed the article, the variant only in late 2018, then these are 6 new articles that you wouldn't otherwise have seen that are newly published since you last reviewed this content. So another question that you might ask here for this particular variant is, I'm interested in understanding aspects of the ACMG constitutional variant interpretation guidelines. Specifically, I'd like to see functional studies that describe this variant so that I can get this VUS closer toward a likely pathogenic call. The way that you do that is by using the category capability in Mastermind, going up to these categories here, particularly the ACMG category for that specific question that I addressed. If you go down to the subcategories and click on the PS3, BS3 subcategories for functional significance, you'll see some of those key terms that I alluded to earlier that we index the full text content in Mastermind for. I can either select individual terms that are of interest to me. I can enable all of the search terms, including in vivo and in vitro, or I can enable one of the subheadings here, either in vitro or more usually just the in vivo category. And then I can choose to erase all of those configurations and just go back to enabling all of those key terms, which is most typical of our searches. If I now submit with those chosen filters, you'll see that the article list is reprioritized because you've now input a new search parameter, that is to say, prioritize papers that have functional content. So you'll notice that the publication landscape has changed its configuration. And in addition, because you've got the article list sorted by relevance, you've changed which articles appear at the top. And so now clicking on that list and then rapidly toggling will allow you to very quickly determine which of these papers satisfies the criteria for PS3 designation for ACMG. Typically, when you invoke one of these category searches, you'll want to change the results that you display in the lower right to showcase those keywords. So in this case, it's functional studies, and that's why you're seeing terms like knock-in, murine, mice, etc. And obviously that'll change as you change the different categories that you use. One other thing to highlight here is that with the new search parameter that you've invoked, you've got a new tag here that is one of your search filters. If you'd like to move away from that tag, you can simply click on that tag at the X, and now you're returning back to your original search. Similarly, if you'd like to change the search that you originally performed, if I go back up to the search menu, if say you have another variant in the same gene and you'd like to perform a new search for that variant, you could click off the search for the variant, your gene still remains, and you can type in any new variant that you have in that gene in your workflow. Additionally to the X's, you can go back to the home page by clicking on this upper left-hand icon. It takes you back to the home page, and then refreshing will clean out your original search. So again, that's the most feature-rich use case that I wanted to walk you through, because now we've covered a large swath of the feature set of Mastermind with that most typical use case search. So the second use case that I have is if you can't find any literature on a particular variant, how do you find information that may be helpful for variant interpretation? So I'm back on my home page. I will perform another search, this time for the ATM gene, a particular variant, the D1853P variant. If I perform that search, you'll notice that this results page has a different configuration. Over here on the right, where before I had article results, now I'm displaying information that suggests that Mastermind, despite its exhaustive and comprehensive search of the literature, was not able to find that particular variant, no matter how an author could describe it, in its indexing. And it allows you the ability to create an alert for that search. If I click on this button, it'll take me to the alert page, and I'll be allowed to receive emails weekly, monthly, or quarterly with any new information that's published about that particular variant. So that's one capability that you have if your results return no articles that mention that variant. On the left-hand side of Mastermind, it allows me to showcase the exhaustive search that we performed of the ATM gene, just as we've done for all other genes. That is the variant landscape for the ATM gene. And you see each of those peaks on the Manhattan plot is an individual variant. The x-axis depicts the linear axis of the protein with functional domains in the protein, the fat domain and the PI3 kinase domain in ATM, so that you can get a sense for what functions of the protein the variant may be influencing. And then the y-axis for each of these variants is a reflection on a log scale of the number of articles that mention each of those variants. So if I hover over, I can see the entire landscape of those variants. If I'd like to zoom in on any of that content with 2 fingers on my touchpad, or I think a right click and a scroll down on a PC, you can see that content expanded out, and then I can reset that capability to bring that back all on screen. So that's a visual depiction of the landscape of variants, which is very useful if you're, say, recognizing a loss of function mechanism for ATM, or in the case of a BRAF gene, which I'll search on later, you can see hotspot regions that are recurrently mutated. Down below, just as we had for the article view, you had a visual representation and a list listed depiction of that content are all of the variants in the ATM gene that Mastermind has found in accordance with the number of articles that mention that particular variant. So in this case, our variant returned no search results, but our interest is in finding related variants. So one thing that we can do is filter that list by the position. So I've typed in 1853, and now what I'm able to see here are variants that aren't the same variant as what I had searched for originally, but that are related by virtue of the residue being mutated. And you can see all of the different numbers of articles that cite each of those variants, and you can click on each one iteratively to see which of those variants is pathogenic and may then influence the likely pathogenicity of this D1853P variant, for which there was no evidence in the literature. While we're on this feature, there's other ways that you can organize this data to address specific questions about the variant, about the gene or its variants. I can say identify all the frameshift mutations in this gene by typing in FS. I can see all of the splice acceptor variants by typing in SA, the splice donor variants by typing in SD, all of the deeper intronic variants by typing in INT, as well as looking at, say, DEL or INS variants. One other capability that you have here when you've performed a search is by sorting after filtering that list of variants by cDNA position, so that you can see, say, all of the variants that appear in the 5' region that's removed from your particular search, or otherwise variants in the neighboring vicinity of your particular variant that may not be right at that particular residue. So that's a useful capability, either eyeballing it and getting a sense for the landscape of variants in the variant diagram, or otherwise using more explicit filtering and sorting capability in the variant pane. So let me go back to the home page and mention the next use case, which is to say, I am a researcher or clinician interested in 2 variants from a patient that have come out of a sequencing assay, and I want to determine whether there's ever been publication of a compound heterozygous patient in the published literature. So I have a specific example for that use case. I'll begin by typing in the gene, and then right after I type in the gene, I'll be able to type in the variant, and you can see how quickly those variants come up to populate my search. If I perform that search, you'll notice now that I've immediately jumped into the advanced search capability, which allows me to do multi-parameter search. So in this case, we've got an AND, but that can be toggled from an AND to an OR. The AND is a more specific search. You'll be restricting your search to only those papers that mention both variant 1 and variant 2. The OR is a more sensitive search, which allows you to see any papers that mention either of those variants or both. In this particular use case, we're looking for mentions of a compound heterozygous patient, so I'll stay with the AND toggle and perform that search. And I go right to Mastermind, who's returning results that indicate that about 300 articles talk about those 2 variants together. If that's more articles than you'd like to search through, and typically the tipping point is maybe 25 or 50, beyond which the rapid toggle is not as useful as, say, using the categories. If I'd like to see the phrase compound heterozygous in any one of those papers, that evidence is in the ACMG interpretation category PS4, and I can go down to the list and say, ask Mastermind to show me articles that mention both of those variants and mention the term compound heterozygote or compound heterozygous, and prioritize those articles that mention those terms close together to those particular variants. So when I now execute that new search, you'll see it's a much smaller subset of data, and it's better prioritized to show me those papers that mention the terms that I'm particularly interested in for this interpretation. If I click on the first paper and I go down and show the keywords that I've put in, you can see right away that there is reference to compound heterozygous germline carriers of these two mutations in a Journal of Surgical Oncology paper from 2007. This paper mentions the Y to C variant 37 times, and it mentions the G to D variant 25 times. And again, it mentions the specific key terms that you've asked of it, so you have every confidence that the articles in this prioritized queue will satisfy your search criteria and be useful for your ACMG interpretation. So let me go back to the home page and visit a different type of search, where if, say, you're interested in KRAS variants, say the G12D variant and the G13D variant, those are highly related variants. If you're not, in this case, interested in compound heterozygote cases, but instead you're interested in seeing papers that mention either of those two variants, toggling your parameter to the OR toggle will now enhance the sensitivity of your search and show you papers that mention either variant or both variants. And if you'd like to focus in on a specific aspect of those individual variants, you can either select one of the key terms from the canned categories that we have, either ACMG interpretation or clinical significance, which allows you to focus in on diagnostic, prognostic, or therapeutic utility, or otherwise aspects of the genetic mechanism of pathogenicity, whether it be terms that are specific to mutations, copy number lesions, fusion events, or epigenetic terms, etc. So the next several use cases that I'll describe are if I'm a researcher or clinician and I'm interested in a variant and I simply want to know what are the associated diseases that have been published alongside that variant. I'll perform the search on the gene. I'll enter in the variant in any nomenclature that I have in my workflow, cDNA, PDOT, or RSID. I'll engage from the drop-down prompt and I'll perform the search. Now you'll notice that this takes me directly to the detail page, which is different than previous versions of Mastermind. This is to streamline the most common workflow, which is to say, show me the articles that mention this particular variant. This use case is indicating that you'd like to know all of the different diseases that this variant is mentioned in association with. So I'll draw your attention to this feature here that takes you back to this page, which is now showing that irrespective of any disease being mentioned, there are 10 articles that cite this variant. And of those 10 articles, there are 6 that mention the disease congenital amegakaryocytic thrombocytopenia. And then some subset of those 6 mention any one of these ancillary terms like aplastic anemia or frank leukemia. So I wanted to draw your attention to that feature that allows you to go back to this page if you're a professional user of Mastermind and you'd like to see this list of diseases in your result set. Similarly, if you are a researcher or a clinician and you're interested in a particular gene and you'd like to see all of the associated diseases, you can perform the search. This is a BRAF search. And again, you'll notice that it takes me directly to this detail page. I'll highlight here that the variant landscape showcases a number of hotspots, which is indicative of a gain of function mechanism for BRAF. And then if I click on related diseases, it will now take me back to that disease page, just as I had done for the variant, only this time it's for the gene itself. And so you'll see a handful of diseases like thyroid neoplasms or colorectal carcinoma, hairy cell leukemias on this list, etc. Similar to that search, a use case that most of our researchers avail when they're using professional edition of Mastermind is I'm a researcher or a clinician and I'm interested in a disease and I want to know all the associated genes to that disease. So if I now type in a particular disease, I'll just go generic here and say myeloid leukemia. If I perform that search, it takes me to this overview page. And now on the left, you'll see the disease is consistent across these results. And on the right are every gene in accordance with the number of articles that mention that gene disease association, no matter how an author describes those terms. So if you're familiar with this disease, you'll recognize some usual suspects like KIT and FLT3. The BCR-ABL gene set is reflected there, as well as a handful of other terms. I'll draw your attention to CD34 here to say that CD34 is a marker of cells that are useful for transplant in treating this disease. Mastermind here is returning the results for CD34 as we're not sure yet whether you're interested in genes that are associated with a disease by virtue of mutation or say by biomarker or by treatment. And so the results that you see here are agnostic to any specific search criteria if you have not inserted those into your initial search. And I'll show you how to do that here in a use case later on. So the next use case that I'll show is similar to that use case, only instead of searching by disease, you're interested in, say, searching by phenotypes. So this use case is I'm a researcher or clinician interested in a phenotype or a set of phenotypes, and I want to know all of the genes that have been associated with that phenotype. So I'll go back to my search box, and I'll begin typing in a specific phenotype. And you'll notice here that I've got a phenotypic result here for Ectopia lentis. And I'll type in, say, a second phenotype. This is aortic aneurysm, and I'll perform that search. And this is now combing the full text of all of the articles in Mastermind, looking for the mention of those particular terms, as well as their synonyms from the HPO ontology. And this is the result that's returned. For those of you who are familiar with this disease, it won't be surprising that fibrillin-1, elastin, and some members of the TGF-beta family are returned in these results. This is phenotypes characteristic of Marfan syndrome. This is the most useful use case when you're not sure what disease you're dealing with in your patient, but you do have a constellation of individual phenotypes. So this capability is available in Professional Edition for clinical users, and you can include as many phenotypes as you'd like using the AND parameter to enhance the specificity of your search, or toggling that to OR to enhance the sensitivity of your search. I'll go back to the home page here. Another search use case would be I'm a researcher or clinician interested in a particular disease and want to know all of the variants in that disease associated with a particular gene. So I'm going to begin by typing in a particular disease. This is hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, which is caused, among other genes, by mutations in this ACVRL1 gene. So now I've got two search terms in my initial search, both a gene and a disease, and I'll perform that search. And now you'll see the variant landscape on the left and the article landscape on the right for this particular search, which includes a more specific search on a disease to showcase all the variants in that gene that have been associated with that disease. If you want to enhance the sensitivity of your search for this result set, I would recommend eliminating the disease search, particularly in the case where the disease is monogenic in nature, or the gene mutations are known to only cause one particular disease. The result set that you retrieve when you eliminate the need to search by disease will enhance the sensitivity of your search, as you see when I clicked off the disease filter. A different example in the same vein would be a particular gene that has several different diseases that it's associated with. So in this particular case, the RET gene is associated, among other diseases, with both Hirschsprung's and medullary thyroid cancer. If you're not interested in the variants that are associated with Hirschsprung's and you want to be more specific and look at only those articles that talk about medullary thyroid cancer, This is a search to do that for the RET gene so that you can enhance the specificity of your search and be assured that these variants are much more highly likely to be associated with medullary thyroid carcinoma. An additional search that is frequently invoked using Mastermind and newly enhanced with Mastermind version 2.0 is I'm a researcher or clinician interested in a variant from a cancer patient and would like to identify papers that mention a specific drug that's used to treat that patient. So I'll begin by typing in the gene of interest and its associated variant, and then I'll begin typing in a particular drug. So vemurafenib is an anti-BRAF medication, and you'll notice here that it doesn't fit into any one of our gene or phenotype or disease or variant dropdowns. Instead, it's labeled as a text search. So if I engage vemurafenib from my search, now I'll be focusing the specificity of my variant search and enhancing the prioritization on those articles that mention vemurafenib as a treatment strategy. So if I perform that search, you'll now note that I'm seeing all of the several thousand articles that talk about this variant and this drug, but prioritize so that those articles that mention the variant in the context of the drug very close together will appear in my prioritized list. And you can go through and add additional text-based, free text-based search terms, as well as modifying the specificity of your search further by adding in any one of these canned key terms from the category data set that we have available in Mastermind Professional Edition. Let me go back to the home page, and I'll have the last use case, which is going to revisit the initial use case and say that the use case is I'm very busy and I need to quickly find the right article for my variant of interest by searching on Mastermind. So I'll go back to the original use case and perform a search on the gene, perform a search on the variant, execute that search, be taken to the detail page for Mastermind, click on the article list. I can choose to stay on the default, which showcases all the gene and variant mentions, or I can return to the variant mentions here, and I can rapidly toggle from article to article to see all of the different titles and abstracts and full text mentions of that particular variant. And then if I'd like to review that full text article, I can, in this case, choose to open up a new PDF tab to view that full text article and make my determinations accordingly. So that is the last use case that I'll highlight because, as I said, it brings it back full circle and it showcases the speed with which you get answers from Mastermind very quickly, whether they're positive and have articles in the result set, or negative, which is still very powerful, where you don't return any articles because the variant has not been published before. Mastermind will allow you to create an alert to be updated in near real time for new publications that mention that variant, or otherwise allow you to explore the variant landscape to see related variants in that gene. So with that, I'll wrap up and thank the audience for your attention. I'll summarize by saying that Mastermind, the search engine, comes in two flavors, the basic edition and the professional edition. The professional edition is useful in clinical circumstances because it allows unlimited search capability, searches through supplemental data, allows you to configure the specificity of your search with canned key terms and free text search capability. And then I'll lastly allude to the fact that we have API capabilities to enhance automation of your workflow, as well as data curation services in the context of clinical users to build out pre-curated data sets to enhance the efficiency of your interpretation, or otherwise to inform research and development in, say, pharmaceutical companies for particular genes or gene pathways and all of the variants that are pathogenic in those genes. Before I turn it over to Candace, I'll just emphasize that we're available to you by reaching out to us through the feedback feature in the Mastermind user interface, or otherwise contacting us at support@genomenon.com. So with that, I'll pass it over to Candace.
Thank you, Mark. So speaking of the questions, we do have a little bit of time for questions, but looking through them, I see there are a lot of very specific questions for use cases that may not be applicable to the group. So I'm going to pick a question that is more generic for you, but I think really illuminating. And that is for those who have tried Mastermind in the past, say even a year ago, what are the differences now? What is the primary changes?
So that's a great question. It's hard for me to remember what happened a year ago. There have been so many changes. I'll start by talking about content. As I alluded to at the beginning, we're increasing dramatically our content coverage. We have now, as I mentioned earlier, 7 million full text articles and growing very dramatically each week, tens to 20,000 of new articles each week. I think a year ago was right around the time that we had announced that we had supplemental data in our data set. And supplemental data continues to be an area of dramatic expansion for our content coverage. As I alluded to earlier, we have 700,000 articles worth of supplemental data, and that is highly prioritized content to cover the full breadth of genetic and genomic content in the supplemental medical literature. We just announced the version 2.0 release, which includes phenotypic search capability. We're expanding on that new feature to allow you in the near future to add drugs to your search, specific drugs, drug classes, and all of their synonyms to, again, focus in on use cases that are directed to treatable diseases, cancer or constitutional. Those are the major capabilities within the user interface that we've brought to bear, although there's a number of great strides that we've made toward curating the entire genome for some of our product services that we provide to our pharma clients.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. So as I said, there were several questions that we will reach out to you individually if you have submitted a question to kind of explain your particular use cases. But just as the slide says, if you go to bit.ly/mastermindv2, if you have not signed up for Mastermind, you can do that today, and we'll give you a license for a free Mastermind Basic Edition, starting out with a trial of Mastermind Professional Edition to try. If you are currently using Basic and you'd like to discuss Professional, please contact us at hello@genomenon.com. So thanks again for joining us. We will be putting this webinar on our tutorial page so that our information is more updated. And be sure to visit us at genomenon.com and follow us on all social media at Genomenon, and have a wonderful day.